Tom Solomon, who has been very involved in the legislative effort, support infrastructure and support for the geothermal industry in New Mexico, is presenting tonight. Tom worked originally with Jerry Ortiz Pino. Senator Pino has since retired, and Tom is carrying the torch, and he's going to give us an update on both what's happening on the legislative front in this past session, and also what the industry is up to. So we will have questions. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat, or you can just wait to the end. We'll have questions and discussion at the end. So if we can just call on people too at the end if you have something you want to what you want further illumination on. I'm sure Tom would be more than happy to reach into his deep bag of tricks to elucidate whatever it is you're interested in on geothermal. Um, so I think that's enough introduction. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jim. As Jim said, my name is Tom Solomon, and the hat I'll be wearing tonight is as the facilitator of the New Mexico Geothermal Working Group. And I am going to share my screen and get started with showing you the presentation and the slide deck that we'll be covering tonight. And here it is. What I'll be covering is developments for New Mexico's geothermal potential. We've been working as the New Mexico Geothermal Working Group since February of 2022, over 3 years now, launched, as Jim indicated, by Senator Ortiz Pino, myself, notably Dr. Sherry Kelly from New Mexico Tech University, and some others. What I'll be covering tonight is the overview of what geothermal energy is, what our goal is, and some policy platform elements that we had for the state, and a lot of recent developments and opportunities. There's been rapid development of the geothermal technology and the prospects for developing it in New Mexico, and that's what I'll be covering here. We should have plenty of time for questions and answers as well. So why geothermal heat and electricity? This is the slide that we've consistently shown to our legislators as we presented to the interim committees and the various other committees, over a dozen of them, to get our legislation passed. The message is that this is a clean, zero emission source of heat and electricity. New Mexico has it in abundance at a world-class level. It is a 24/7 power source that can be developed in New Mexico. We believe it can provide that last 10%, the last mile for getting to 100% clean energy in the state. We also believe it can be great sustainable economic development for New Mexico, and in particular provide a transition path for workers in the oil industry, because the skills they have and the rigs they operate, 90% of that is directly transferable to be drilling for heat instead of for oil and gas. Geothermal energy, of course, is using the Earth's heat. The core of the planet is, we believe, roughly the same temperature as the surface of the sun, so extremely hot. And just 5 miles underground, it can be, twice the boiling point of water, 400 degrees Fahrenheit or so. And we hope to harness that energy, which is fully renewable, in service of fully renewable electric grid and other sources of clean energy. When the Geothermal Working Group started, we established this as our set of policy goals. So we really wanted to pass some geothermal energy policy planks to provide a solid basis for new companies wanting to develop this resource to get help starting in New Mexico. And to that end, we wanted to provide funding for New Mexico Tech to be our center of excellence and expertise for the state in geothermal resources. Some more funding for the Energy Minerals Natural Resources Department so that would be effective as an agency partner with sufficient staffing to help develop this resource and targeted towards developing this resource in two phases. In this decade, the 2020s, to expand known existing sources of geothermal energy, which include heat pumps for buildings, direct heat for greenhouses, of course, our 27 hot springs and spas, possibly expanding our one existing geothermal electric power plant, which is down in Hidalgo County, called Lightning Dock, photograph right there. While we pursue phase two, which is promoting the long-term development of what's called advanced geothermal electricity or hot dry rock geothermal to provide that final 10% of the clean energy grid through the 2030s. And of course, during this time frame, we know that the electric grid will need to grow to support the additional load coming from electric vehicles, from new heat pumps, new industries starting up, et cetera. So we're looking at potentially 1 to 3 gigawatts of electric generation coming from geothermal. And all of this happens in the context of the Energy Transition Act, which is state law now, passed in 2019, requires us to convert to renewable energy and zero carbon resources on this schedule, getting to 100% zero carbon for the investor utilities by 2045, and 5 years later, 2050 for the rural co-ops. And we believe that geothermal power plants should absolutely play a part in this transition. New Mexico is number 6 in the nation in geothermal resource potential. This is the national map. And you can see a lot of that potential is in the western states, Northern California, Oregon, Nevada, et cetera. But New Mexico is number 6. Neighboring Colorado's doing pretty well as well. And if you look at the full state of New Mexico and this map in the lower left, anything that is kind of shaded in light orange or deeper reddish colors really has excellent geothermal resource potential ready to develop, especially if it's hot, dry rock, as well as some classic hydrothermal resources. And so that is what we intend to develop in the state. This is a graphic. I love this graphic. It's very explanatory, shows what we mean when we say hot, dry rock geothermal energy, using the Earth's power, Earth's heat for electric power, zero emissions, energy storage included. And so in the upper right, you have at the surface a power plant, a thermal power plant, but instead of burning natural gas to provide the heat to turn a fluid into steam and run a generator for tying into the grid, you're using the Earth's heat. And you do that by drilling an injection well deep into the Earth's surface. In New Mexico, we're talking about, say, 18,000 feet. We did a test well near Lightning Dock a couple of years ago to that depth. And then you use some oil industry technology to generate fractures in the rock layer. We're talking granite at this depth. And that provides the surface area sufficient to have injected water absorb the Earth's heat at that depth, and then to return through a production well that you also drill that feeds back into the power plant, run that hot, very hot fluid through a heat exchanger, extract the heat, run the electric turbine, generate electricity, and then take that slightly cooled off water and then just re-inject it back into that same fracture zone in a continuously recirculating cycle. And so it is renewable energy, zero emissions, done well. The losses for the fluid should be minimal. And that is hot, dry rock geothermal energy, which we believe has tremendous potential. A couple of engineering problems had to be solved. how to drill effectively through really hard granite, which is tougher than shale, which is what the oil industry drill through, and drill bits to survive at those advanced elevated temperatures. And so to that end, we have been working with our legislative partners and champions listed here. Great thanks go to Senator Ortiz y Pino, Representative Roybal Caballero, Representative Tara Lujan, and Senator Sewells, who helped us get these bills through. And we now have a pretty solid geothermal policy platform in place in state statute. And these are the bill numbers passed in 2024. And it accomplishes the following: provide 4 years of recurring funding to New Mexico Tech and Socorro, so they can be our geothermal center of expertise and research for the state, the holders of all the data and the expertise about what does that geothermal resource look like in New Mexico. We established a grant and loan program for geothermal grants for new entities wanting to start up. That'll be administered by MNERD with a pot of money now up to $15 million. We passed a production tax credit for geothermal electricity, 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour, and the ability for new companies to deduct the gross receipts tax from their taxes for expenditures related to capital equipment and the new plants that they have to build, which is really where all the expense goes for new production. And then finally, Senator Sewell's bill, the geothermal heat pump tax credit, which provides up to 30% tax credit for the system cost for a ground coupled heat pump. So that is in place now. And we extended our efforts in the 2025 legislative session. 3 bills that we pursued, got to pass 2 of the 3. The first bill, House Bill 289, we could not get through the finish line. It went through 4 committees and passed the House floor, and then died awaiting a final vote on the Senate calendars. But still, many thanks to our legislative sponsors, Representatives Roybal Caballero and Lujan and Senator Stefanix, and our expert witnesses, ECAM Director Rebecca Stair and Lucy Darago, an executive with XGS Energy. But we did successfully pass another $10 million, adding to the geothermal grant fund that was in the House Bill 2 budget. And that got us up to that $15 million total. Thanks there to Representatives Small and Dixon for their help in the Legislative Finance Committee getting that through. And then Representative Romero passed House Bill 361 to allow repurposing old oil and gas wells that may have uncovered some good heat resource and being able to repurpose them into geothermal energy storage or development. So those are the bills that we have been pursuing. This is a slide just showing our efforts on HB 289. I couldn't resist showing it. Couldn't quite get it done, but put a lot of effort into getting that through. And of course, it helps educate our legislators getting that messaging out. At the federal level, interestingly, geothermal energy has got good bipartisan support, including support from our current Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, who is an enthusiastic supporter of geothermal. Turns out in his previous job in an energy company, he was an investor in some geothermal companies, and he included geothermal energy as number 3 on a 4-item priority list in his opening remarks to the Department of Energy, number 3 after fossil fuels, advanced nuclear, and before hydropower. So we expect to continue to get support from the executive branch, and then in the legislature, both in the House and the U.S. Senate, bipartisan legislation has been filed. This one is called the Geothermal Steam Act. Senators Cortez Masco and Murkowski, as well as Representatives Lee and Malloy, Democrat and Republican in each chamber, helping to sponsor and get that through. And that would provide us some streamlined permitting opportunities, extending the provisions that already apply to oil and gas to geothermal. So we have a hope for the future for support in both the executive branch and the legislature at the federal level. So where is that R&D happening? It is in Utah at a place called the Frontier Observatory for Research into Geothermal Energy. That's a picture of where it is. Western Utah, Beaver County, and they have been doing advanced geothermal research to solve those two technical problems that I mentioned. Remember, we're drilling into really hard granite, need to do that cost effectively and reaching into temperatures that go into the hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit. And, oil well drilling bits and technology were not prepared to solve that problem. So they have been doing that work and have been successful to the extent that we are now building the first of a kind power plants using this technology. Most notably, the use of polycrystal and diamond bits seems to work really well in granite. And that first of a kind power plant is really within eyesight of the Forge facility right next to it there in Utah by Fervo Energy. It's going to be a 500 megawatt geothermal electric power plant. Already has customers signed up all over the Western US, including Southern California Edison. 500 megawatts, by the way, would make it the fourth largest gas-fired power plant in New Mexico if it were powered by gas. We have 18 of those power plants. I'll show you the list later, but that's a large-scale power plant. Fully operational by 2028. First phase, 100 megawatts by 2026. That's next year. And they actually have environmental permits, potentially up to 2 gigawatts, 2,000 megawatts, which we'll see. And they have published their cost projections for this power plant. Basically, they've said they expect it to be competitive with natural gas at about $80 per megawatt hour. So that makes geothermal energy quite attractive, a fully dispatchable 24/7 non-intermittent resource with some storage at cost competitive with natural gas. And I mentioned that we have one geothermal power plant in New Mexico. It's called Lightning Dock, the 15 megawatt power plant supplying the P&M grid in Hidalgo County down near the Boot Heel. And that power plant has been struggling for a number of years to meet its power purchase agreement contractual commitments of 15 megawatts because of the way that they were tapping into that hydrothermal resource there. So the company was purchased by a new entity called Zanskar a year ago, and they have some expertise in subsurface modeling and use that to basically identify and then drill a brand new well adjacent to their old production well. And they claim to have been wildly successful, having found what they believe will be the most productive pump geothermal well operating in the United States. And there's a little geeky chart on the lower part of the screen here showing thermal energy increasing to the right and towards the top. This is their plant. This is their new well in excess of 200 megawatts of thermal. The next highest one is 170. So we have high hopes for Lightning Dock to be operating at full speed and maybe with the potential to expand further. We'll see. Other prospects in New Mexico. So, these first power plants are going to be pricey because, brand new technology before you get it fully de-risked tends to be a bit more expensive. We are looking at the Department of Energy or Department of Defense rather, possibly providing a lot of assistance. So turns out Department of Defense would really, really like to have electric power resources under their own control, separate from whatever power grid that they're adjacent to and currently powering their military bases. They'd like to have something inside their base fence lines that is not dependent on outside sources for their own on-base security and resilience. So they have identified 11 different geothermal companies selected as awardable, in this case by the U.S. Air Force for their bases. And 3 of the companies on that list are members of the New Mexico Geothermal Working Group. Power Planet, TLS Geothermics, and XGS Energy are representative on our working group. So what the DoD offers is, the land, the military as a customer, and help raising the capital. And of course, I think we all know that the Department of Defense is a little bit less sensitive to costs versus a private company. So helping to get over that first hump of getting those first plants built and then running down the cost curve. And I mentioned, just go back to this Fervo Energy slide. We are watching the industry, whole industry is watching this plant with high interest because once they get this thing built, we believe that there will be a proven design and a set of technologies that can be used and replicated nearly everywhere. It's just a matter of drilling deep enough and you will find hot, dry rock. And if they establish that this can work there, should be something that we cut in place and duplicate all over the world, including in New Mexico. We will, of course, need a trained workforce to stand up this new industry, and New Mexico Tech and Socorro is leading the way in establishing that education program. They have, starting in fall of 2025, rolling out a graduate certificate in geothermal energy. It's a 2-track program, 1 track focused on kind of direct use of the heat, 1 focused on advanced geothermal electricity production. It's a 15 credit 1-year course targeted towards working professionals in the energy industry, and they're signing up students right now. In addition to that, we have been working with very well-known hot dry rock geothermal consortium called Project Inner Space, and they published 1.5 years ago a report on Texas geothermal potential, and they said they wanted to do a similar report focused on New Mexico. So they signed us up and they are helping to fund the project. They've signed up 8 different authors from New Mexico to draft these 8 different chapters, and we will actually get an advanced pre-publication look at what's in the content of those chapters on Thursday in New Mexico Tech's 3rd annual Geothermal Workshop Conference. So excited about that. And we believe that this report will be published and available to the public by the end of May, maybe with a splashy press release rollout that we'll see if we can pull off. And then we, of course, need to develop 1 or more geothermal projects. And we kind of looked around New Mexico, what's been done, what's been proposed, and identified, this couple of handfuls of what we call low-hanging fruit project potentials. And we already mentioned the potential for a geothermal electric plant inside a New Mexico military base. Thinking White Sands might be at the top of that list. Possibly a geothermal electric power plant for data center expansions. Been in the news that data centers, especially to support AI load applications, are looking for new sources of power, and we have one in Los Lunas. The possibility of expanding Lightning Dock. 2 of our New Mexico pueblos have done studies or proposed geothermal development on their pueblo lands, Owen Gay and the Zia Pueblo. And New Mexico State University had in the 1980s through about year 2000 a fully functional 1st generation geothermal system, which we believe can be rejuvenated. And there's some other possibilities. So we're basically working with this list to see if we can get 1 or more of these off the ground. Another reminder of the energy transition. And when we passed this bill in 2019, we said through 2040 we were going to be 100. We're going to be renewable energy. That's X percentage, 80% renewables. Through 2045, that last little bit we called zero carbon because we weren't sure it would be called classically 100% renewable. I think leaving the door open potentially to solutions like nuclear energy. I no longer believe that's necessary. I think geothermal can plug that goal. And just as a reminder, we said in 2030 we needed to be at 50% renewables for both the co-ops and the utilities. Well, it turns out that we are already at 50% renewable for the New Mexico grid. We established that as an average in 2024 per data from the Department of Energy. And so you can see that wind and solar have been part of an increasing percentage of our portfolio. And we crossed the threshold of 50% throughout the average for 2024, and it just increases from here. And that last 50% is where the unique attributes of geothermal being fully dispatchable with some storage that comes with it can be a real benefit for that last sprint to the finish line. And New Mexico has remaining in that last 50%, 18 gas-fired power plants. This is the full list of them. Remember, I said a 500 megawatt power plant would be the fourth largest in the state. Well, those are the three largest. 500 megawatts is the big power plant. And we have a fraction of the Four Corners coal plant still operating through 2021. And if you look at this list and where those plants are located, a good 2/3 of those facilities are right along, or adjacent to the Rio Grande Rift, where geothermal is most prevalent and easiest to access. And of course, every one of these power stations has an existing connection to the grid. All those transmission lines are there. There's an existing power station. There's a power plant with land already owned. And repowering some of these stations, I think, presents a real interesting opportunity for New Mexico to convert and transition these existing power plants that have to convert before 2045 to one or more of them, maybe several, to geothermal energy. And as a reminder, this is the 5-year price history of natural gas. Lots of volatility. Geothermal power plants, like all renewable projects, pretty much you pay for them all up front because there is no fuel cost. So geothermal electricity costs will be much less volatile, meaning hardly volatile at all compared to natural gas. Next steps for the Geothermal Working Group include getting the rulemaking finished from the Energy, Minerals, Natural Resources for all that legislation that we passed. Want to get that done by the end of this quarter so that we'll have rules to publish for the geothermal grant and the loan program and those tax credits, and so that we can be starting to accept applications to start getting that money out the door to projects and companies that want to get started. Of course, publishing that Project Interspace Geothermal Report in May, and the class is rolling out in the fall of 2020, fall of this year, September, for the graduate geothermal certificate for New Mexico Tech. And then after all of this, help draft what we've been calling a geothermal roadmap for New Mexico, which is basically going to be a document that says, these are all the places to go. This is how you navigate the bureaucracy, all the systems, all the sources of expertise. You want to get a permit, you got to go to the energy department in the state, and here's the contacts for that. You want to know where the geothermal resource is located, call up these people at New Mexico Tech on down the line. So that'll be our roadmap. Hopefully get that done this year. And then ultimately, this is my aspiration to identify and announce a New Mexico Geothermal Electric Power Project for hot dry rock geothermal, or maybe in a new hydrothermal power plant. um, within the next year. MNERD will act as the state energy financing institution to help accumulate funding from the various sources and working with developers that want to pursue getting started. And we've identified a number of geothermal private companies that interested in working with us or we're interested in working with them. These first three, part of our working group, Sage has been operating in Texas in some of their bases, looking at geothermal, and of course, Fervo, that big plant in Utah. And so that is the end of my talk, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Tom. Uh, that was very interesting to get that update. And sounds like things are moving along. I'm going to take executive privilege and start out the questions. We have some good questions in the chats, but
Great.
let me just one of the interesting things you mentioned was the current administration's Department of Energy prioritize list of energy resources in this country.
Mhm.
Um, would you briefly talk about how geothermal stacks up both against quote advanced nuclear and fossil fuels, both in terms of environmental impact and cost?
Okay. Well, I would say in particular for advanced nuclear, geothermal, hot dry rock geothermal has the advantage of it's actually being built. Versus being fairly aspirational. There are no advanced, at least what's called small modular nuclear reactors under construction in the United States, some outside the country. And comparing costs, if you look at the published levelized cost of energy, um, geothermal, as we said, is competitive with natural gas, which is kind of in the middle of the stack. Solar and wind tend to be the cheapest on that stack. Nuclear energy tends to be the most expensive, and for a number of reasons. It also has the advantage of, you know, small footprint, no waste, no fuel to pay for, and will be significantly cheaper. So, and I don't expect to get the same level of local opposition for a geothermal power plant that any nuclear power plant would receive. So it's cheaper and it'll be faster to build. And there are operating geothermal power plants all over the United States, but they're using existing hot water aquifers. So it's a proven technology. What we're just doing is extending it to doing hot dry rock. So advanced nuclear, that's my answer for that.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Tom. Um, so let me look. Uh, Andrew Stone has a question. Andrew, why don't you just go ahead, take yourself off mute and ask your question?
So, I was wondering if these have to be, um, are they real full base load, 100% all the time? Or do you have to worry about whether you're cooling your rocks and stuff? And then along with that would come, what are ongoing operating costs expected, maintenance and whatnot? And finally, how have they projected the cost reduction curve? Because I know right now, of course, they'd be very expensive per megawatt, but is this something that really can get to be, or is it just fill the niche of base and you always pay more for your base load?
Good set of questions there, Andrew. So geothermal power plants that are operating today, I think quoted capacity factors are in the 90% range. They're very reliable. They are They are what's called fully dispatchable. Any power plant has to go down periodically for some maintenance. Um, whether it's coal or gas or nuclear or less so with solar, but wind turbines need to be maintained as well. But 90% of the time they should be operating, which is the kind of the quoted statistic. So fully base load from that standpoint. Um, Operating costs, I have a slide on that, but that is all rolled into the one number of cost per megawatt hour. And they are saying um, 70 to $80 per megawatt hour, which compares to about $70 or so for natural gas, well over 100 for nuclear. So very competitive as baseload power. And as I said, there is a long history of operating geothermal power plants already in this country, but it's classic hydrothermal. So it's tapping into an existing discovered hot water aquifer, underground water that's already in contact with hot rock that you just recirculate. This is hot dry rock where you're providing your own heat transfer fluid from the surface. So that's what's different. And you, of course, have to drill for it. The cost curves are published in the Nature article that was included in the footer of one of my slides. And I did provide a link to the slide deck so you guys can look at that. And the costs basically the costs are all incurred up front in the drilling, the fracking, the establishment of the subsurface resource reservoir, and then building the power plant at the surface. We know how to build geothermal power plants. We know how to build a power plant. Um, and so those costs are well known. It's the drilling costs that are going to be a little more speculative. But through the process of doing that testing in the Forge facility in Utah, they have some pretty good cost numbers. They know how long it's been taking to drill the wells, and by solving some of their drilling technology issues, they have established they've doubled or more the rate at which they can drill into hot granite. So it's all in that study, and that it all rolls into that one number, $80 per megawatt hour, um, but competitive with natural gas.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew, for your question. Just to put part of Tom's response in perspective, the capacity factor for the San Juan coal-fired power plant was 65%. That's a closely held secret, but that came out in testimony at a PRC hearing. So fossil fuel, just to underline, fossil fuel power plants don't necessarily operate 24/7. And if it's a 60-year-old coal plant, it certainly doesn't operate 24/7. So let's move on to another question. Lucy, you have had your hand up. Are you still with us?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. My question is about geothermal heat pump systems. So not the advanced geothermal, but I'm curious, Tom, if you could speak to the state of the private sector. I know there's a lot of money out there, but my concern is, do we have the folks available to actually do this work? Um, and I'm really excited to hear that New Mexico Tech is starting this geothermal energy certificate program. I work for a school district, and we've seen just, in the past 2 years, costs for installing these systems going up, around 5 times. And that has been explained as there just aren't enough folks, subcontractors doing this work in the state and in the surrounding states. So curious if you have any insights there.
Yeah, I'm less of an expert in that field. To defray some of those costs. That's why Senator Sewell's passed the ground coupled heat pump tax credit that can pay for up to 30% of the cost of a system. Um, ground ground source heat pumps and heat pumps in general, require electricians, electrical contractors. We don't have enough of those in New Mexico. Jim may be able to chime in, but that is an additional workforce we absolutely need to train and develop, and that is a nationwide problem. Mechanical contractors, electrical contractors that do that work probably pretty fully booked, and that may be reflected in the pricing that you're seeing. Um, I don't know the extent to which those efforts that were started in the Biden administration are going to continue, but that's certainly a need, and it's a growth industry. I saw a statistic that last year, for maybe the first time in the US, there were more heat pumps sold than gas furnaces nationwide. So it is growing. The transition is happening. They just make sense.
Yeah, and what we had heard was specifically folks to dig the wells is lacking as well. So
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. So ground source heat pumps work well, and I think are most cost effective for large buildings because not such a good application for most residences, at least in New Mexico. Air source heat pumps probably a better solution there. But if you've got, a school, a dorm, an apartment complex, an office building with a lot of users to amortize those costs over, ground source heat pumps make a lot of sense and are probably more cost effective. And they are already in place. For example, the VSU Cleveland High School in Rio Rancho, I know, invested in that when it was being built some years ago, ground coupled heat pumps. So I see another question in the chat. If I can, since I'm kind of able to read it now myself, Jim, I might cover that one. Bill
Sure,
Bright asked a question about power storage. Why would something like that be needed if it's available 24/7?
right.
So here's how that would work. As part of 100% renewable energy system, it's probably going to be dominated by wind, which will operate most often at night and in the wintertime, and solar, which will peak obviously during the day and in the summer. And there will be times, and we're seeing this in California, where you've got more solar than there is load to handle. And so you don't need a geothermal power plant operating at that time during a summer day. So what you could do is just turn off the circulation loop for the geothermal power plant, maybe during the hottest parts of the day in the summer. What will happen then is that underground fluid will reach a temperature higher than its steady state temperature when it's circulating. And when it turns back on again, say when people come home at night, 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. or something, in the evening, when everybody comes back, turns on their entertainment system and starts cooking dinner and all that good stuff, turns on their air conditioner, you have a big surge in load, you can turn on your power plant. And because you're operating with higher than steady state temperatures, you will get a surge in power production from that geothermal power plant. And that looks like storage. And then after a period of time, it returns back to normal. And so that's why you would need, storage on the grid, especially with renewable and intermittent resources, is a good thing. And geothermal energy can be part of that storage solution.
Thank
I'm
you.
remembering actually one more part of Andrew Stone's question, which was about the rocks cooling off. Geothermal power plants extract heat from the subsurface at a greater rate than the heat is replenished from the Earth's core or from the surrounding radioactive decay in the rock. So it is true that over time, and we're talking decades, the rock will cool down a bit. And the design parameters for these geothermal power plants are basically designed to operate for about 30 years. And after 30 years, you might have to drill some new wells in an adjacent region of hot, dry rock and repeat the fracturing process and probably continue to operate with that same power plant, and then let that original field rest and rejuvenate, which would take a number of years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So just a couple more. Bruno, I wanted to respond to your question about the slide deck. There, Tom has put a link to a Google Doc in the chat where you can, do you see that? Where you can get the access to the slide deck.
Yeah.
Uh, Good. So, Maria, are you still with us? Maria had a
Yeah,
question.
I am. I am. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question, Maria, of Tom?
Sure. So Tom, I actually had a couple. One was basically in relation to
Induced seismicity?
yes.
Yes. That's a very frequently asked question.
Yeah, okay.
What's your second question?
What was my second question? My second question was more of, and it might be a little bit early to even think about this, but issues of people with, kind of the NIMBY attitude on
Oh
this.
yeah, NIMBYs. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that's it.
induced seismicity is one. Let me show you. Let's pull up this same chart. So if you recall this graphic, and I didn't mention it, but you see these black lines heading down underground adjacent to the production well? That's seismic monitoring. So when you're drilling the injection and production wells, you insert some seismic monitors to see if in fact you're going to be disturbing an existing fault that maybe you didn't know about. Part of the selection process for a geothermal region to develop will be, you probably want to avoid active fault systems, at least. Of course, in California, they're drilling in an adjacent to existing fault systems, which is another story. But that's what you do to mitigate against seismic risk. There is a published, established set of risk reduction protocols for inducing earthquakes, induced seismicity, and it involves seismic monitoring while you're doing the drilling so that you can detect if you're triggering a fault and then you stop. And once the whole system is established, it's pretty stable, is my understanding. In this country, there really haven't been significant seismic issues related to hot, dry rock geothermal. There were two classically well-cited seismic events outside the country, one in Basel, Switzerland, and one in Tokyo, and they were like 20 and 10 years ago for reasons that are now well studied and well understood. And that information went into developing this seismic risk reduction protocols, which is published and it followed, we believe, is a very low risk and mitigates that against that. However, it is out there in the in the information sphere, and like so many items with a kernel of truth, it can be overblown and get people activated, especially used by opponents to marshal opposition. And so that is something that we've been working with through the course of making this presentation to legislators over and over again, come up with that same question. It is a frequently asked question because it is a risk, especially when you mention fracking. Of course, induced seismicity risk is really an issue with oil and gas production. In particular, in Oklahoma, they have been seeing quite a number of smallish earthquakes related to re-injecting produced water into old oil wells and over-pressurizing subsurface regions that may have some seismic fracture zones. And there's a history of earthquakes being produced there, but that's oil and gas. It's not geothermal.
Great.
Yeah.
Um, you had touched, Tom, on the subject of geothermal, shallow geothermal using heat pumps. Um, One of the things I know 350 has been concerned about over the last 4 or 5 years is the natural gas usage for heat at the University of New Mexico. When the University of New Mexico, which now controls the hospital, um, went ahead with the big expansion that's just being completed now of the hospital. They decided they needed a new heat pump. I'm sorry, a new heat plant. And initially they talked about gas. Um, my understanding is they may be reconsidering that and talking about digging up Johnson Field and putting a heat loop under it. Do you know anything about that?
That's about what I know about it, Jim. I understand that they are looking at that. I don't have much detail other than that, but I have heard the same thing, and we are hoping that they do pursue that. But I don't have any additional detail to share with you. Um, I'm looking at some questions in the chat as well. So the term hot dry rock geothermal actually originates in Los Alamos labs from work that they were doing in the 1970s. And it has often been the case that presenting this topic to, the public, to interim committees, the legislature, or during the session, somebody that had experience working at Los Alamos in that era comes up and asks, well, what about the hot dry rock program from Los Alamos Labs? The work that's happening today dates back to the pioneering work that they did there in and around Fenton Hill, Fenton Lake. And they pursued what was a very fascinating possibility back then, but the drilling technology was not mature enough. And they basically ran into unsolvable technical problems. That is one reason why the Utah Forge facility to establish that R&D has been doing their work. And they are taking advantage of the tremendous developments in drilling technology that has been pioneered in the shale revolution from the oil and gas industry. So regardless of how you feel about that, they have gotten very, very, very good at drilling vertically, horizontally, in all sorts of conditions, um, driven down costs dramatically. And those technology advancements and porting them over from the oil and gas industry to apply to hot dry rock geothermal is what is being done at the Forge facility in Utah. So, polycrystalline diamond bits, oil and gas technology. They're using that there. They also had to come up with some novel cooling technology to handle the really high temperatures that oil and gas is not encountering. But that's what's, we basically owe the progress and the existence of the geothermal applications that we're talking about right now to the work that was done in Los Alamos Labs. A member of LANL is part of our New Mexico Geothermal Working Group. So we have a connection to Los Alamos Labs as well as to Sandia Labs in the working group.
Great. I see another question from Suzanne. Suzanne, are you still with us? If you want to take yourself off mute, you can ask Tom your question.
Oh yeah, I was just looking actually at the Forge water chemistry and groundwater data they had, and I saw big variations in the TDS density, like gradient they had plotted. So I was just curious if that's a known impact or risk that can be mitigated?
TDS, total dissolved solids?
Yes.
And what risk are you referring to?
High TDS in groundwater.
Yes. So I think the vision of hot dry rock geothermal is that you're um, basically trying to avoid existing subsurface groundwater reservoirs, and you're just looking for dry rock and then providing your own heat transfer fluid from the surface. So you don't have to interact with existing groundwater and don't need to worry about dissolved solids.
Okay, thank you. That's
That's
what I thought.
yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
my answer. It may or may not be accurate. I am not a geologist. I'm an electrical engineer. Um, I'm a geothermal advocate and dilettante, but don't have the deep expertise that many others in the geothermal working group do have. But that's my understanding.
Uh,
Yeah, no, thank you. I might also be not reading this correctly.
Yeah, it's
So
it's also
thanks.
possible that we have some members of the geothermal working group online, and let's see if anybody's there. If anybody has a better answer than that, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll.
well, another, Suzanne, another way to look at this is in general, if you're going through subsurface groundwater, you would have a well casing that would protect the groundwater because you're not interested in that groundwater, as Tom said, you're going to go much deeper than the groundwater. So the integrity of the well casing would be the protection.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah.
you. That's my understanding too.
Good. Um, so I think we have maybe time for one more question. I see Andrew, the inquisitive Andrew Stone, has another question. Oh, and
I just wanted to make the point that I think it's really excellent to have a green technology that the oil and gas industry can get behind because we've seen a lot of recalcitrance across the aisle for doing stuff, but this is something that will help their workforce. So, um, bravo, Tom. I think you've been doing a great job getting all of us to understand what it is and what the opportunity is and how it fits in with solar and wind and battery storage. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
do we have any last minute questions?
I see Luke Brash on the call. Luke is with Los Alamos Labs. I don't know if you feel able to unmute and comment, but there are a number of questions that came up. Anything that I said that needs correcting from your perspective as a technology expert? Or any reflections on the deep history at Los Alamos Labs with hot dry rock geothermal?
Uh, yeah, not a whole lot to add here. I actually thought you covered the material quite nicely, so no concerns there. Did you have something specific you wanted me to address?
The recent discussion about groundwater interactions or maybe induced seismicity, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think in terms of the TDS, the protection of the aquifer using, surface casing, conductor casing is the standard of practice, and that'll all be covered in any sort of well permit process to make sure that groundwater is protected. It is a precious resource. Nobody wants to damage it.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the induced seismicity, I think you covered that pretty well. There are new techniques coming available for making seismic risk even smaller. And there has been some pretty notable advancements in the scientific arena to better understand the nature of induced seismicity, the precursors, and identifying better techniques for controlling it. And I do agree that the United States hasn't really had too many concerns with induced seismicity, but that doesn't mean that we haven't had it. So it's important to move forward with caution, optimism, but also being smart about how we do things. So the very first induced seismicity ever documented was actually in the United States at Rocky Mountain Arsenal. It was a wastewater injection well near Denver, Colorado. So we do actually have a long history of it, understanding it, and we have a lot of people who care about it who will do their best to prevent it. The Basel case was an interesting one because that was really early on in the geothermal development process, and they were developing a geothermal resource basically right under a very populated area, a city, and there was very high sensitivity to seismic damage in that area. So, in hindsight, probably should have proved out the technology in area with a lower risk factor. But with the way Fervo is doing things right now in Utah, they're very far away from anybody who could be hurt by any seismic event that they happen to trigger.
Right.
So they're in a prime position for learning more about how to identify when things are about to go wrong, how to prevent it from becoming an issue. So it's a very promising field right now.
Thanks, Luke.
And I have a lot of hope for it.
Yep, appreciate it. I'll see you Thursday.
See you.
Tom McCrory has his hand up. Tom?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add there was a question about working across the aisle. Colorado Mesa University in Grand Junction over the last 20 years has retrofit virtually their entire campus to work off ground source heat pumps. They're thrilled. They've saved about $12 million in that time. But in a recent interview, I was entertained when the guy in charge of the project said, actually, uh, Colorado Democratic Governor Polis and Republican U.S. Representative Boebert both love this. It's the only thing they agree on. So there's hope there.
Yep. It has not yet been politicized, and we hope it never will be.
So I'd like just to quickly add to someone raised the question about how come the cost of ground source heat pumps is spiking. And so there are probably a couple of reasons. One is, Tom, you alluded to the shortage of electrical and mechanical contractors in the state. Um, that's being addressed. How long it will take to balance out, I don't really know. Um, Certainly, at least 5 years, maybe optimistically. The other aspect which we see in the industry is a lack of familiarity with the technology in the contracting world. Um, some of us at 350 has been involved in trying to uh, educate the private sector for heat pump technologies in general, um, and ground source heat pumps in addition to that. Santa Fe Community College has been doing a very good job about educating contractors. So if you're not particularly familiar with the technology, when you bid a technology, a new project for the first time, you're going to pad that bid to cover the unknowns. And so this is another reason that brand new or newer technologies initially tend to be more expensive until people get familiar with them.
Interesting point.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Tom. As always, the master of PowerPoint, and this is uh, such a great and successful project so far. I'm glad to see that the geothermal working group is continuing its work. You know, I always want to thank Jerry Ortiz Pino for getting the ball rolling on this, and but it's gotten a lot of momentum, so it's totally awesome. Um, I just quickly wanted to put a plug in for May's um, speaker series. So we're going to have on May 27th, which is a Tuesday, we're going to have a panel of UNM students talking about environmental and climate activism on the UNM campus. It should be really interesting perspective um, from their perspective, and let us know what they're doing and their successes. So you will get an email about the exact details on that and the proper link. So thank you all for being here, and we will continue with our successful series.